You cannot be what you want to be on the sidelines.
Fear will stagnate you, period. Just get out of your own way and keep pushing.
I'm Malik.
And I'm April.
Welcome to Malik Books. Malik Books was something that I think can serve not only my family and me, but also the community, because I want to make a difference and a change in the community by using books, because books change me for the better.
Malik Books give voice to the voiceless.
My grandma walked the streets night and day. When I went to USC, that was the only money I had once a month. She sent me by selling sweet potato pies and KDDs.
Every time I would see her or talk to her, even on the phone, I would cry. It's just words of wisdom that comes out.
She has so many kids that love her because she just had a soul that was so loving. That kind of gave birth to the Crusader Praise Scott Scholarship Fund. I was a sprinter, so I've had junior Olympic champions. I've set national records in track and field. I also was a former Olympian in 1984. Whether it was track, whether it was Malik Books, they all kind of coincide with each other. I just love helping people. We're an African-American independent bookstore that we carry a very large, diverse, and cultural children's book selection, because here at Malik, we believe children are 100% of our future.
We know that the self-esteem grows from here, not here, and that's very important.
You can find a whole different world in books. Today, there's not that many bookstores. So people thank us for being an independent bookstore in the community and taking a chance. Well, the Crusader Praise Scholarship Fund has given over, in the last 5 years, 18 scholarships to freshmen entering college. And the purpose of the scholarship fund is just to help serve those in need. Malik Books is just an extension of our community. What brings me joy is to see someone feel joy from the work that we're doing.
Well, you saw it firsthand. Malik Books. We located out in Los Angeles, and we've been serving our community since 1990. And we have a large selection of children's books, as well as every genre you can think of. We're in the age of the growth of the new Black book revolution taking place all over this world. Self-published authors, major authors who've been published. I got two on the show today that I am so pleased and happy that I get an opportunity to introduce to all of our audience today. So welcome everybody, because we have a really robust show with Tracey, Michae'l, Lewis-Giggetts, and Imani Perry, who's going to be doing the moderation today. And I just want to tell you something about these two, because between the both of them, and this event today is called Black Joy, the stories of resistance, resilience, and restoration by Tracey, Michae'l, Lewis-Giggetts. And let me say this, between both of them, they got 24 books published, you know. Now, I feel intimidated, because it's a lot of female energy here. I mean, and these two 24 published books, as well as educators. And one thing I can tell you about Malik Books believes in education. And we believe children are 100% of our future. So going forward, I would like to introduce you to our major guest tonight, whose new book just came out, Black Joy, which is the subject matter of today, Tracey, Michae'l, Lewis-Giggetts. As a writer and educator, Michae'l offered those who read her work and hear her speak as an authentic experience and an opportunity to explore the intersection of culture, identity, and faith at the deepest level. She is a professor of English and Black Studies at the Community College of Philadelphia and the founder of Heart Space, a healing community created to serve those who experience trauma of any kind through the use of storytelling and art. As a writer, Tracey has published 15 books, including several collaborations with numerous high-profile authors. In 2016, Tracey was honored by She Knows Media as one of the Voices of the Year for her nuance and personal exploration of mental health. PTSD, and self-care. In 2021, Tracey became one of the 20 writers who contributed to the groundbreaking book, You Are Your Best Thing: Vulnerable, Shameless Resilience, and the Black Experience, edited and acclaimed researcher by Bernie Brown and the founder of the Me Too movement, Taraner Burke. Also forthcoming is her dynamic book that we're going to be talking about today, Black Joy, the story of resistance, resilience, and restoration. Our moderator for today, our moderator is Imani Perry. Imani is a professor of African American Studies at Princeton University and the author of 7 books, including the award-winning book, Looking for Lorraine, The Radiant and Radical Life of Lorraine Hansberry, and another book, Breathe a Letter to My Sons. Her most recent book is South to America, a journey below the Macy-Dixon to understand the soul of a nation. Imani Perry's new book, South to America, joins a tradition of books that travel the South to find keys to the United States, its foundation, its changes, and its tensions. Perry was born in Alabama and approaches the task from a variety of angles. Now, both have just published these beautiful new books that at the onset of Black History Month, which is we in right now. So I'm just overwhelmed in joy that I have the opportunity to be able to have these two guests and who have books that just published, and we in Black History Month. So without further ado, we want to get right into it. So I'm going to turn this over to Imani Perry, who's going to be our moderator today. And so welcome, both of you. Welcome to our audience. Welcome to Malik's Bookshelf. And Malik Books. But that was my podcast I was throwing out there called Malik's Bookshelf.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction and for doing the work that you do, Malik. I mean, it's so important, and for all of us, and especially for us who are writers, because we need you. Yeah, so I really appreciate that. And Tracey, this gorgeous book, Black Joy.
Yes.
And I want to start by saying that I am not reading books right now because I'm feeling overwhelmed by talking, although I'm sick of talking about my own book, but I opened your book and felt from the very first page just a kind of, is a beauty, a tenderness, a care for us. It was, for me, an experience that felt especially healing right now. So I want to start by thanking you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Imani. Before we even get started into this, and I know we're talking about Black Joy, but I've been on this mission that whoever I talk to, I want to give them their flowers. And I just want to give you your flowers. I am so appreciative of you and your work. I, like you, have not been able to read, but from the beginning of South to America, I just couldn't stop. And there was so much that resonated with me as someone born and raised in Kentucky. So when you started talking about Appalachia and all of I was in. And not even just that, Breathe and, Looking for Lorraine and all of your work. You're such a value to us and a treasure. And I just want you to know from my heart, sincerely, thank you for your work, for who you are. And thank you for talking to me today.
Okay, so we have a love fest going on.
Yes.
Now, I want to talk to you about you wrote a beautiful piece on Black Joy that turned into this book. And this book it is meditations. It is about that take us to the different components of finding Black joy and the significance of Black joy. It's almost like it's a memoir that has this kind of creative form that's about seeking and searching, and each story has it's like they're all instructive stories. So what was the process? Like, how did you go from the article to being like, I really want to write a book on this subject?
Yeah, that's I'm still thinking about that. When I wrote, yeah, I had been writing in pieces about joy because I was doing that work on myself. I had My therapist had asked me very pointedly, what does joy feel like in your body? And I couldn't tell her. I didn't know. And so I'd begun to be very intentional about trying to access joy or identify it when it came up in me, like this response to pleasure. And so that led to that first essay. At the point where I realized that this was going to be a book, or that, there was more to it than just this one story of me and my daughter, I think I love that you use the language of meditations, because I think that very clearly was my approach, was like this unraveling of my own story, and then sort of using that as an entry point to look at Black folks in general as a whole. So, like, for instance, there's one piece where I'm, very specifically writing about moving from Philadelphia to the shore, right? And like I'm talking about this, but then it ends up exploring this person, Abraham Galloway, and like his story. Like, so I feel like that there was, not to get too woo woo, but I feel like there was something else happening as I was writing this, as I was unraveling. And when you mentioned form, like I decided to liberate myself, even as an English professor, from the rules, right? And to like play around with, form and lyrical, metaphor and all of these kinds of things, and just put it on the page and see how it evolved. And so meditation and just like freeing myself to write in ways that I may not have written formally before were the two kind of ways I entered these stories.
Because I could read, I could see the elements of your previous works of poetry,
Mhm.
fiction, like just in terms of sort of an attention to language and beauty and lyricism.
Yeah.
There's also a quality of it that's like, I mean, these are lessons,
Mhm.
but it's not written in the form. And I'll start with, I love a self-help book.
Right.
It's not written in that form, but it has that kind of instructive quality
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah. I was determined to not be very prescriptive, like, because, I say very early on that, you know, Blackness is not monolithic. Black joy shows up in a myriad of ways. And so I didn't want to say, like, I'm providing the blueprint for Black joy, and here it is. But I did find that what I was learning was
Mhm.
coming out on the page also. So that's that, I guess, that instructive quality that comes out. It's part sermon, but not preachy. You know
Right?
what I mean? Like, like just, here is the journey that I was on, and here is the lesson that I learned, and here's how I think this might apply to us as a collective.
Yeah. I mean, I think the lessons are really, they're so helpful. And I love that, so we see you as a child in
Mhm.
relationship to, to your mother, grandmother, that elder relationship, and also in relationship to your daughter. So, I mean, did you think about sort of overtly about the healing and the beauty in sort of mother daughter, multi generational Black women's experiences as you were?
Yeah. I don't, it's a good question. I don't know if I intentionally went into the writing of that. I think I was aware of it because I've read so much that does that kind of work. Um, but I don't think I think, you know, my grandmother in, I've got dreams to remember Granny kind of showed up for me, and I thought about like all the things I wish I'd had a chance to say to her,
Oh,
all
yeah.
the things that I wish that she'd known, you know, that in my at this big age of 46 that I know now that I didn't know, when she passed away or even before that. And so this felt like an opportunity for me to kind of cross the dimensions and talk to her and
Yeah.
have this conversation with her and tell her that, that thing that I think I remember at 3 years old, what I think about it now, right? I don't think that I realized sort of the ancestral or like generational piece of that until after everything was written, and I was, in the editing process. And I'm like, whoa, like even my great grandmother. And then how that is all kind of tied in to you went away. Are you still there?
Still here. I don't know. I don't know why the screen is flipping, but I'm still here.
Yeah, like I don't think I honestly don't think I realized those ancestral kind of generational pieces kind of connecting until we were in the editing process and it was actually pointed out to me, like and my editor was like, do you see like the connection between this piece and this piece over here? Because we were thinking about these three movements of resistance, resilience, and restoration, and what essays were going to go where. And as we were kind of thinking about that, and I was playing around with that, it started to become more clear to me that there was something else going on besides me like just telling the stories of my family.
Did you I was gonna ask like if the about the sequence of the essays. Was that like a sort of back and forth process of the order, or did you have an idea at the outset? Wait, yeah.
I did have an idea at the outset. So in my first, the first draft I submitted, which was really more like draft 7 or 8, but by the time my editor got it, I had a particular placement.
Okay.
Um, and it wasn't until I got feedback from the editor and some other readers, because we had some other readers involved. My editor was very is a white woman, was very clear that there were things that she probably could not connect to or identify, so she brought on some other readers that were black
Mhm.
that could read and say, oh no, don't edit that out because this is what she means. Right, like I get it. And so in that process I began to look at what really could be categorized as resistance and what really could be categorized as resilience. But there was so much overlap and so many stories that could have gone in two different movements, especially between resilience and restorations. In hindsight, I would say like there were a couple that I'd probably switch out. Um,
Really?
yeah, like there are a couple that I think in hindsight probably would go like in what gets burned off. I still struggle with where that placement of that now. I mean, you know how it is. Like at a certain point, you just have to let it go, right? And just say, it is like it is going to be in this place. But in hindsight, and now that I'm kind of reading it to people, I'm
Okay.
like, I kind of feel like that belongs into this other section. But yeah, all of that kind of rearrangement or like movement kind of happen in the rewriting, in the editing process, and not in the beginning.
I mean, I loved the way in which there's an elliptical quality in the sense that it's not a straightforward progression. It's like we venture into different dimensions of growth and wound and transformation. Like it allows, because it's actually how life is. It's
Yeah.
not, a straight line. I did want to ask you about the vulnerability. Um, and your decision to tell your story so intimately and to be willing to share that with us and how that feels now for you. So I'm going to ask a couple selfish questions so
Okay.
that I'm just telling you. Yeah.
No. I wrestled with which stories from my life I would tell,
Mhm.
but I'd made the decision to hold the truth as sacred and
Mhm.
to tell it the best way I knew how from my point of view, from my POV. And to not be too overly concerned about any other voices, as I had been in the. I will say that I was concerned in the very, very beginning,
Mhm.
um, because I do talk about sexual abuse and sexual assault. I do talk about some things that don't just impact me,
Right.
and so there was a care that I had for myself in writing the process, in writing the story, but also for the story itself, that kind of cracked me open, right, a little bit, and gave me the freedom to just lay it out there. There were moments though where, like, I remember the piece "You," where I talk about my first love, where I
That's
read.
what I was about to ask you that.
I read it to my husband, and he was like, "Are you sure? Like, you sure you want to put that in?" Like, to this day, he was like, "That one." Like, do you want to?
It's so, I mean, it's such a gift because you capture, I know it was your individual story, but it has an intimacy that resonates so deeply with those feelings of, well, why, what happened, what didn't happen, hope, your very core, your expectation, like the arc of coming of age. And really, so it's a first love story, but it's also like a story about the heartbreak that goes with growing up because
Yeah,
things don't, and it's so beautiful, um,
thank you.
but so intimate.
Yeah, it was hard, but I just, like I said, like no other book have I ever written has, and I keep using this language because it's the only word that I can think of, unraveled me like this book,
Yeah.
right? Like, and also set me free. In
Mm,
other words, like, I really just decided to just be as free as possible on the page and let the chips fall where they may, right? And the chips have fallen. So, yeah.
and it's that, and it's also so instructive because you talk at the end of it about, that life had to be the healer, right? Like the other experiences, finding love and partnership, like that. It wasn't this, like, so often we get this pat and then, like I
Yeah.
got over my, I got myself together. No, this happened. It took time.
Yeah. And the pathway to joy is like a winding one, right? Like, it's not linear. It's not like, even in that particular relationship, it was winding constantly. Um and there's a kind of acceptance and resignation, maybe. I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for, but like that, for 10 years of my life, this is what I learned, right? From 14 to 24, this was my journey with love and all that, my understanding, I guess, of love and all that comes with it.
Yeah.
And this is how it has informed me today in my marriage, in my just in general, how I parent my daughter, because she's all like, what is boys and whatever now. So, like, yeah, like, I just, the flip side, the challenge of that is that now that the book is out in the world and Imani Perry is reading it, and so is reading it, and the world is reading it now, um I don't have any regrets. But I do have moments of like, whoa,
Oh yeah.
everyone is in my heart now, But I think we need more of that, right? Like, I feel like vulnerability is how we, at least one way that we heal, is that it normalizes all of this kind of, these feelings, these emotions, not just joy, but, like I said, the speaking of trauma, the wounds, what we learned, the lessons, all of that, it kind of normalizes those conversations, which I think is needed and necessary nowadays.
Absolutely. And I mean, part of what I find so useful about your approach is that it's those, like, I love to sort of the vision of you as a little girl, like being curious about love. Like, what is this love thing, right?
Mhm.
Um, because it's so, it is, kids are curious, but we don't often sort of think about kids as emotionally curious.
Yes.
And
Right.
so I was like, right, but I don't think I have ever thought about that question in myself before. So it also helped me sort of think back to childhood. But
Mhm.
that you so these and it's sort of it's beautiful, it's sweet, but it's also in the midst of there's wounds, there's suffering, there's the difficult parts of life. Which to me is part of the lesson of Black joy that you're offering to us, right? That this is not an evasion of
Mhm.
all of the trauma and wound that we experience at all.
Exactly. Exactly. It's not. Um it is that all of that and joy live in the same container. It lives in the same body, and we make room for it based on where we are and our need, in that moment. And so what I guess I'm asking people to do is to think about, do we know that the pain, the trauma, the hardship, the whatever, is that all consuming, right? Is it consuming our container to the point where we don't have joy is like this little speck of a thing that we have to dig through to find,
Yeah.
right? And so in what ways do we allow joy to kind of expand,
Mm,
right? So that we have more space for it. It's funny that you were talking about the me as a little girl and being curious about love. Like part of my process in writing was I did a lot of inner child work, so I had to go back and talk to 8-year-old Tracey and literally, like, in a visualization, just ask her some stuff,
mhm,
because there was this distance, right? And there was life that had happened that kind of informed what I thought about what my childhood, but I actually had to go ask little Tracey
mm,
for, what she thought, which was kind of put a different spin on the writing once I was able to kind of access her and talk to her. Which was strange at first, but
did it
that go
was it
ahead.
scary?
Yes. And you do that with someone who can help you parse things out. So, and that was done in the course of therapy, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not something that I advise people to just like do randomly, but like that inner child work was part of my deep trauma work, like unearthing some stuff so that I can heal.
Mm,
But in while I was there, it was, I wanted to see through her eyes. And that's 8-year-old Tracey, but that's also 14-year-old Tracey, and that's 25-year-old Tracey, and that's even 30-year-old Tracey, like, and 30, I guess 6-year-old Tracey having a child at that point.
yeah.
So that was definitely part of the process for sure.
Um, I was gonna the I wanted to follow up that that question with this formulation that you have, and you have a whole section about touch.
Mm,
And and I particularly resonated with your just the way you talked about acupuncture and healing.
mm,
It's my own journey. So and it's also really important because it's not something that's that widespread amongst Black folks,
yeah.
right? But can you talk a little bit about sort of that sort of your interrogation of the relationship between touch, not being touched, the sort of physical distances that we often we take on as a way of protection, but we need.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I realized maybe like 4 or 5 years ago that while I had been touched, I had not allowed myself to be touched. And that sounds weird, but like what I mean is that of course I'd been touched, right? Like I'd been hugged, I'd had sex, all this good stuff. But what I mentally had blocked off in terms of feeling pleasure in that, like uh, was because of trauma that had not been um, dealt with. And so there was a lot of blockage. And then when, as someone living with chronic pain and chronic illness, there was a need for touch, right? To kind of soothe, but then I had this blockage also, right? And I had done all the things that grandmama and them had told me to do. I prayed about it. I'd gotten the oils. I'd done all the things, and it really became part of my healing work to try to figure out why there was this gap between what I was feeling and what was actually happening. And so that's me going to the acupuncturist and her, I never forget it, it was this spot right here, putting a needle in this spot and me wailing. And it's funny when I think about it now because I was wailing, but I was also, what's happening? I didn't know what was happening. Acupuncturist was kind enough to tell, there's traumas trapped in your body, right? And that release, just that one little bit of released so much. And I mean, I wasn't fixed, I wasn't healed, but that I really began to understand the connection between our mind, our bodies, and our spirits, and what had been blocked for so long, out of fear. I had so much fear of experiencing pleasure, of and fully allowing myself to embrace pleasure. And that began the work of stripping away, or at least trying to separate the thing that happened to me with what my present circumstance, right? So I am with my friend and I want to hug, and I don't have to worry that this hug is going to hurt me, right? So it's a lot of things around PTSD, a lot of things that I couldn't access joy because of that. Because if you think about joy as a physiological response to pleasure, right? All of the adrenaline and dopamine and all the stuff that happens to you. Well, if you're blocked, no wonder I didn't know what joy felt like in my body.
Yeah.
No wonder that I could hold my child and experience great love, but not really be able to sit in the moment, right? Because I knew I was going to drop her on the way out, or somebody was going to steal her.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm just being honest.
That hypervigilance that comes with, yes. Which is just something you just said, I just want to go back to, because you said that needle, you weren't fixed. And I think that part of what I love about your approach in this book is there is a journey to healing, but it's about a way of living, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about a relationship to yourself, to your body, to the people around you, to the world, so that it's not like there's an end. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really inviting.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as though trauma ends. It's not as though, there's so many of the events that you described that, of course, we're still experiencing or live, white supremacy, racist violence, right? This is just, but that you're giving us tools for being in a kind of a relationship that can be healthy, notwithstanding.
Yeah. And the thing is, what I uncovered was that this ain't new. I'm not writing some new idea. Our ancestors been knowing. That's why there's a piece in there called "What They've Been Knowing," right? And my great grandmother knew how to move that trauma out of her body, right? Whether it was rocking back and forth at church, or screaming out loud, or at the juke joint, or wherever, right? We knew, and we didn't have language for it, so we didn't call it bilateral stimulation or PTSD, or we didn't have the language. But there was this understanding of, somehow that if I do this thing, that I can heal, but or set at bay, or at least allow joy to do its work, right? In that moment. And all I was doing was just tapping back into what grandmama and them been doing all along, but just didn't have all the fancy words for it, right?
Let me ask you this. Is there a connection between Black joy and drama?
When you say drama, what do you mean?
No, trauma.
Oh,
trauma.
absolutely. I mean, I think joy itself is this universal thing that everybody has. Black joy lives in this melanin and therefore lives in the cultural, historical experience of us as a people, which unfortunately is has been traumatic, right? And so yes, I think there's a link, and that's the reason why I said, like, the joy and the trauma can live in the space together, because it has been living in the space together. It's the reason why we are the most resilient. I say we're the most resilient people on the planet
Absolutely.
by far,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
We've
Absolutely.
mastered the bounce back, you know
Absolutely.
so, like, in that regard, like, it's always lived there. But
Mhm.
what I fear though is that I would want us to, I just want a more consciousness of it, right? Like, I want us to be in so that we can wield it when we need it, right? So part of me figuring out what joy feels like in my body while watching television one day is not so I can, say I learned what joy felt like because I watched This Is Us, right? Like, it
Mhm.
is so I have a snapshot of that feeling and that emotion now in my brain, so that when another unarmed Black man is killed, I have something I can access, right? A snapshot, a mental snapshot of joy that I can access, that can maybe right size me when that I'm feeling all consumed by that rage or that, sorrow or whatever it is, despair.
I came across I think it was J. Rogers. I think he wrote something to the effect that said, many books have been written that while, during this was during the time, we've been in America, and and many psychiatrists and people wrote books saying, how do Black people find joy in all the trauma that they've been experiencing through
Mhm.
slavery, oppression, and so forth? And they was like, and they studying us because we like to sing, we like to dance, we like to shout. We still find time to find joy. And they
Mhm.
don't understand that, because the condition that we've been in, it's been a fight, it's been resistance, it's been resilience, it's been restoration. So it's just, they study us
Mhm.
because we are loving people, we are forgiving people,
Mhm.
and we still find joy.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So can you separate trauma from Black joy though? Because mental health is a major issue all across this nation,
Yeah.
and is really not addressed in the appropriate manner. This PTSD, we call it post-traumatic slavery syndrome,
Right. Mhm.
and it's been an issue because in the Black communities all over this country, we have a lot of health issues, and most of them, we lack self-esteem, we lack, self-love, we lack um being being not lack of awareness about who and what we are, and we demonstrate that in the lifestyle in many times all over this country, just in our actions and our behavior. And so when you're trying to address mental health, which is a major issue, a lot of times we don't even know we're suffering. Like you were saying in your story, you didn't know that you was going through this trauma until later on in life. So that's a microcosm of reality of all of us. A lot of times we don't even know that we are lacking, we going through trauma, and we lack certain things that can help change and make a difference in our life. Um, and so was this book written in an attempt to make a difference in that area? Because trauma is real and it's big, and it's a reality.
I think this book was written to counter the prevailing narrative that's out there of that we have low self-esteem, or that we are, somehow struggling because of something that is inherent to us, and not necessarily the way these systems have the positions that these systems have put us in. And so my goal with this book wasn't to center anyone else or any other, narrative about us, but just to focus on, I opened the introduction of the book talking about our joys rooted in self-compassion. and empathy, because I think it's about the way we see ourselves and the way we see and treat each other that really is more defining, right? Because these trauma, the white supremacy and all the stuff that we've dealt with, the trauma hasn't gone anywhere, right? It is here, and it has been here. What has changed, maybe to your point, Malik, is maybe the way that we see ourselves in it. I attribute some of that to, yes, mental health challenges, maybe, but also exhaustion.
Yeah.
We're tired. Right? And so part of that exhaustion is what I said earlier about allowing that righteous rage and that despair to become all consuming in this container that we have, right? And not being able to tap into or access the joy that our ancestors always knew, the thing that drove them to migrate from Kentucky to so and so, like I think that's the piece. So I think it's important for me to not focus on the narrative of who Black people are, but how we treat each other, I think, and how we see ourselves.
Can I ask you something related to that? Because I was wondering, especially because you write so beautifully about the 90s, is whether
I mean, it's the best decade. I mean, what?
Those of us in Generation X, do we have a particular calling because we're the post-civil rights movement generation? Like, right, because I think some of that exhaustion is also like, the generation before us had a whole movement and so much didn't change, right? Like we saw people give their lives.
Yeah.
And so much didn't change. And so is there something, is the sort of in-between, right? The in-between generation that we have to offer in particular?
I think there is. I don't know if I know exactly what our task is. I feel like as much as there is this calling that we have as Gen X, I also feel like there's this sense of being stuck, right? That we don't quite have maybe and I'm making a generalization here, but like bear with me, like maybe some of the internal resources that the previous generation had, nor the energy of the Gen Zers and late millennials, right? Like I don't, and I think there's this feeling of, we have innovation, I think, in our generation. I think we have insight from both sides. I don't know if we've really figured out what to do with it or how to wield it. I think some of the challenges of Gen X is that some of us bought the lie, right? Of capitalism, Black capitalism, of, if, respectability politics. Like, I think that us 70s babies, have kind of are unraveling ourselves, like I'm doing in this book, from those things that we were taught that didn't work. Right. But also we have the desire to hold on, like I do, to the stuff that held us together spiritually and emotionally. Yeah. And so how do you keep that? Like, it's like my great grandmother said, throw the meat and spit out the bones, or keep the meat and spit out the bones. How do we as a generation keep the meat and spit out the bones?
Oh yeah.
Without somebody getting mad, It's a good question.
Please everybody.
No.
There is no agenda. There is no plan. There is no way to please everybody. Right. We have to have an agenda that focuses on our real issues. And if we don't, then those issues are never addressed. And I think that you pointed out that we can learn from the past. That's the most important thing from yesterday, is to learn from it so that we can chart a path out in the future. We know what don't work, so we have to apply what will work. And that exhaustion that you talked about is real, because like I used to beat that drum all the time about this and about that, and it was nothing but talking about the problem. But I have no solution. And that's what typically goes on today. We can talk about the problem, but we need to come up with solutions. And that's where I'm at right now, because I'm exhausted about beating that drum about the problem. We know what's going on the last 100 years. Much hasn't changed, but we got to figure out what steps we need to make a real difference to create a generation of change. And so it starts now. I think your book is a great contribution because it is addressing that we are resistance, resilience, and restoration. We have overcome a lot, but we got a long way to go, and we can do it. Listen, y'all have written 24 books. Both of y'all. Y'all are two stories that fit the stories of resistance, resilience, and restoration. Imani, you work at Princeton University. There was a time that wasn't an option. But here you transforming the thought and minds of the next generation right now. And Tracey, you using all your experience in your life, you've written 15 books. You are attacking an issue that is real, trauma, but yet celebrating the good that came out of it, Black joy. So I think that, I personally think that we need to unite, pull some money together, buy some land, and build a new future right here today.
There is this piece in the book about place, right? About where to be and settle and be and build. And there's Kentucky, Chicago, Philly, and now Jersey.
Yeah.
Water.
I mean, the global pandemic kind of pushed me into it, but like really having to sit with myself and ask, where do I want to be? Where do I want my child to be? And really thinking about land.
Yeah.
And what land meant to me. And I'm from Kentucky, but even that, I mean, like I wish we had a whole other hour, because I want to talk about Appalachia. I want to talk about Harper's Ferry. I want to talk about all the things, Imani, but like
we have a lifetime to have those.
But growing up in Kentucky, but in the quote big city of Kentucky, and then going to the University of Kentucky and meeting people from the mountains, right? And hearing their stories and seeing where their stories weren't that far different from mine. And then being at this big age, as I said, and wanting to somehow return to the land and not really know where that comes from and what the connection is. And, my route from the South is North Carolina, Alabama, Kentucky, then Chicago, talk about migrations, right? Like, so yeah, I think place is important. Place for me is always been important because I've always been running, and that's a whole other thing. So.
Running and settling, putting down roots. But that's sort of our story, right? Trying to have a place of our own, but also escaping.
That's important. That's important. And we cannot discount that matters. And that we have to have a base. Foreigners come over here, they create a base and they in a hub and a home and a community. You know what I'm saying? We have to do the same thing. It's a belonging, it's a calling, it's just natural, it's a connection. And so we trying to build our roots, and we can do it right here, and we should, because we are so important in this country. We have embellished this country. This country is great because of perseverance, because of them 3 words: resistance, resilience, and restoration. Because of them 3 words. This is why this country has become one of the greatest of all time in modern world, in civilization. So, hey, one of the things that I read in your book and that you talked about, Tracey, was the influence that E40 had And I wanted to ask you about, because the hip hop community, rappers, entertainers are very influential.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what part did that play in your life and how you became a career writer?
That's a good question.
That is a good question. I'm amazed of how many times E40 has come up in my conversations these last couple of weeks. I honestly, in writing that piece, I did not think that it would be like the thing that people gravitate. I think what I was trying to do in that piece was really just talking about the role that hip hop and music in general played in my identity and how I saw myself. And it wasn't, a lot of times when people talk about music, even there's another piece called The Healing Power of Prince.
I love that.
Yeah, like a lot of times people think of music as escape, especially if you have a traumatic childhood. You think that it is a way for you to escape into the music, right? We hear that language a lot, and I guess there's some truth to it. But for me, it allowed me to see a version of myself that had not been reality, but could have been, right? So when I was in the Burger King dancing with the mop to Mary J. Blige, and I saw Mary J. Blige, like I saw a version of myself that was confident, that was, comfortable in her skin, that, that there were all of it. I could envision, it was like a visualization. I could envision myself being loved, loving, all of these things. And so the music for me, listening to E40 and the Click, was really just about the turn of a phrase, the language. Oh, I can do that. I can write in metaphors. I can speak, like I can do those kinds of things. And it excited me, right? And it informed who I would later become, right? But it was really about like not escape, but just who, I don't have to limit myself as to be this little brown girl from Kentucky. I my parents and my family always say that I was the big dreamer. Like, I was, I took my $300 in my budget rental van and I drove myself to Chicago, to the South Side, to a little studio apartment on the lake. And that's where, and I'm going to do my thing. Right. And, all that came with that. So the music just kind of helped me dream, I guess is a best way to say it.
Well, I know that the entertainment hip hoppers, rappers, they real influential. And a wise man once told me that a rapper can influence thousands of people, more than preachers and ministers these days. That's how influential they are, and so they have had an effect on all of us in one way, fashion, and so I thought that was it stood out to me in your book because we all one way or another has been influenced by that community. But I wanted to ask both of you this. It's like, I said earlier, I have a podcast called Malik's Bookshelf, bringing the world together through books, culture, and community. My question to both of you is, what is on your bookshelf, and what is the most significant book that you have read that impacted your life? And I see them piles of books behind both of you.
Joy is on my bookshelf.
And I got South to America right here. So that's first and foremost.
Love it.
I mean, I think that's such a good question. I would never. Someone asked me a question the other day about it. I could never name a. I mean, I think this is why spaces like Malik Books are so important, because I couldn't name a single book, but having access to books, and it's similar to what Tracey just said. Music was the same way. Like, so much of my passion for writing came through hip hop because it's about language and creativity and art. And books similarly, like you can escape into books. You can imagine in books. So there's so many that have influenced me. I would say the book I teach the most is Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk, 1903, which is, going on 120 years old and still speaks so much truth.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just asked that also, and I was just devastated. I was like, you cannot ask me to choose one book. I'm looking at my bookshelves now, and I'm like, there is no way that I could do, because they all speak to a different part of me, a different space and time when I read it, or whether I taught it, or anything. So like I could went on the one hand saying their eyes were watching God. On the other hand, I could say Sula. On the other hand, I could say, breathe, or heavy, or any of these other books. But they are all have equal value because they all informed me, right? It would be like saying, which one do you like, your arm or your leg? Well, they kind of they serve different purposes, but they're kind of both useful and necessary. And that's how I feel like about most, like 99% of Black literature. It's both, it's necessary, right? Because it's going to speak to somebody. So I agree, Imani, like what you guys are doing at Malik Books is necessary, because those children that are walking in and they're picking up those books on that massive, I didn't even know you guys had that massive, children's bookshelf, like I remember going to the library. I remember like that feeling. I get it to this day. My husband like cracks up because I can go into a bookstore, a library, and I'm just like, wait a minute now, I didn't do that. I just get like this feeling of like, and it's almost overwhelmed because I can't read them all. Like I want to read them all. Mm-hmm. So I can't give you one, but
Well, hey, you name both of you names at least a book that's on your bookshelf, because that's what Malik's bookshelf is all about. It's like, I got a bookshelf, I do book reviews, but I got my own personal bookshelf. But we all do. We all like certain books, and certain books have opened us up and created and charted a path for us, and inspired us. And so I personally like a lot of nonfiction. I like to read history books, health books, self-care, self-help. I love books like, as long as it's nonfiction, but I didn't always start out that way. When I was young and I was in college, I read science fiction. That's what fascinated me in books, but it opened my mind and my imagination. That's what I liked about science fiction, because I believe imagination is important to our development, creativity. And when you stifle that, like, you can have a lot of money, but if you ain't got no imagination, you ain't gonna do nothing with it.
But that's true. The imagine, and I'm still a fiction reader, and people, even though I don't write fiction, I remember growing up, the saving grace, my mother said, anything you read is good to read. I don't care comic books, I don't care graphic novels, like just read.
Absolutely. Right? No, like my daughter is 10 years old, and her thing is graphic novels. And at first, like, I was trying to throw chapter books at her, like, no, you gotta read this. But once I saw like she just had a hunger for it, I'm buying every graphic novel that comes out. Like John Lewis has a graphic novel, I think it's like March.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, you're getting that one and getting all of them. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Whatever book you're reading, I used to sit and read my mother's.
Hello, I knew it was in front of me. I knew it was in front of me. I had to go get that paper. Yeah. 3 volumes. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. At Malik Books. On MalikBooks.com. We ship it nationwide.
That's it.
Well, this has been fun. And I really enjoyed our conversation. It was very enlightening. I appreciate this opportunity, Malik Books, to host you, Tracey, and to have Imani do the moderation. I just wish you nothing but success. Y'all educators, your authors, and I think that you are making your mark and your input into the next development and future of our people. So I appreciate both of you. Thank you. And Malik Books look forward to y'all selling 1 million of them books. New York Times
Thank you
bestseller.
so much. Thank you. And thank you so much, Imani. Like I said, the love is real. I appreciate you and your work.
Same.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. That's mutual. Thank you also. So good to meet you, Malik.
Yes.
You're welcome. And thank you, both of you.
All right.
Let's see here.